At 10:51 p.m., in 3 countries simultaneously, the networks activated. In Iraq, it began with a convoy of 4 pickup trucks departing a walled compound in the farmland west of Jurf al-Sakar, each truck carrying a 107mm multiple rocket launcher and a crew of 3. They had been waiting since sundown. In Syria, a flatbed vehicle in the outskirts of Deir ez-Zor was backing into position behind a burned building's remaining wall, its cargo, a BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launcher, being oriented by a crew that knew its azimuth by memory because they had aimed it at the same target 16 times in the preceding 8 months. In Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, a Hezbollah logistics team was completing the fueling and pre-launch arming of 6 Fateh-110 ballistic missiles at a dispersed storage and launch site carved into the valley's eastern ridgeline. The launch sequence timed to fire all 6 within 40 seconds of one another. The targets were 3 separate American military positions and 1 intelligence facility, the Victory Base Complex perimeter near Baghdad International Airport, the al-Tanf garrison in southeastern Syria, the Ain al-Assad Air Base in Iraq's Anbar province, and the U.S.-linked intelligence collection site in northern Jordan that the proxy network had been attempting to reach with sufficient accuracy to matter for 11 months. The attacks were not coordinated in the real-time sense of a unified command issuing simultaneous execute orders. They were coordinated in the way that a carefully pre-planned operation is coordinated. Each element knew its window, its target, its role in a design whose purpose was not to destroy the American positions through military force, which the proxy networks lacked the capability to do, but to demonstrate simultaneously across 3 countries that the Islamic Republic of Iran could reach American forces wherever they were positioned in the region, that no location was safe, that the cost of Operation Epic Fury would be paid in the form of sustained, distributed, impossible to fully defend against harassment that would accumulate over months and years into a political toll the American public would eventually refuse to continue paying. The strategic logic was coherent. The tactical execution was competent. The intelligence about what was waiting for them was fatally incomplete. Operation Nightwatch had been running for 79 days, not as a response to the simultaneous activation at 10:51 p.m. The intelligence that had revealed the activation would come in the last 14 minutes before it happened. Nightwatch had been running for 79 days as the systematic, patient, comprehensive mapping of every node in the IRGC's 3-country proxy network. Every command post, every logistics hub, every weapons cache, every communications relay, every safe house that served as a coordination point for the militia commanders who translated Iranian strategic direction into tactical fire missions against American forces. The mapping had been built from signals intelligence that traced the financial and communications flows between the IRGC's Quds Force coordination elements in Tehran and the militia leadership in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon. It had been built from human intelligence, reporting from sources whose access to the network's interior was direct enough that the targeting analysts at U.S. Central Command had been able to assign confidence ratings of 70% or higher to 112 of the 147 aim points in the target package. It had been built from the pattern of life analysis that overhead surveillance sustained across the key nodes in all 3 countries, watching the rhythms of activity that reveal operational intent to analysts who have been watching long enough to know what normal looks like and recognize when it changes. At 10:37 p.m., 14 minutes before the activation, a Space Force Signals intelligence satellite registered a surge in encrypted messaging traffic between IRGC Quds Force network coordination nodes in Tehran and 14 separate contact points distributed across Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The surge had a specific timing signature, not the sustained elevated traffic of an ongoing operation, but the brief, high-density burst of a final execute order distribution. The analyst at the Intelligence Fusion Center at Al-Udeid, who was monitoring the Nightwatch collection feeds, had been trained to recognize this signature. She had seen it simulated in training exercises 17 times. She had never seen it in a real collection event. She recognized it immediately and reached for the circuit that connected her directly to the Nightwatch operations cell. The Nightwatch operations cell had been holding its strike package at 40-minute readiness since 9 p.m. that evening, when the pattern-of-life surveillance across 3 of the highest confidence nodes in the network had simultaneously shown activity consistent with pre-operational preparation, vehicles moving at unusual hours, personnel concentrations at sites that were normally quiet at night, the specific behavioral signatures of people who are getting ready to do something and cannot completely conceal the fact. The 40-minute readiness posture meant that aircraft were fueled and armed, pilots were briefed, weapons loads were configured, and the only thing separating the strike package from execution was an authorization that required the confirmation of hostile action or imminent hostile action across the network. At 10:37 p.m., the analyst's call to the operations cell provided that confirmation. The authorization was requested at 10:38 p.m. It was received at 10:41 p.m. The strike package began launching at 10:44 p.m. At 10:51 p.m., when the first rockets left the launchers west of Jurf al-Sakhar, the aircraft that would answer them had already been airborne for 7 minutes. The rockets from the Iraqi element of the coordinated attack fell on the Victory Base Complex perimeter between 10:58 p.m. and 11:01 p.m. 8 107mm rockets aimed at the sectors of the perimeter that the militia had identified as housing the highest value American assets. 2 impacted within the perimeter wire, both in the motor pool area that served as an access point for the logistical convoys that kept the base operational. 3 vehicles were damaged. No personnel were in the motor pool at the hour of the attack, the base's protective protocols having dispersed personnel to hardened shelters within 90 seconds of the incoming rocket warning sirens that activated at 10:57 p.m. when the radar detection system acquired the rockets in flight. 6 rockets impacted outside the perimeter in uninhabited open ground. No American personnel were killed or seriously injured. The Grad rockets from the Syrian Element fell on the al-Tanf garrison at 11:03 p.m., a salvo of 12, fired in the ripple sequence that the BM-21's multi-barrel launcher enables, their accuracy degraded by the age of the unguided rockets and the improvised firing position. 4 impacted within the garrison's outer perimeter. 3 hit hardened shelter structures and caused no casualties. The garrison's personnel had been in protective posture since 10:52 p.m., when the alert from the Victory Base attack had traveled through the warning network at the speed of the secure communication circuits that connected American positions across the theater. 5 rockets impacted outside the perimeter entirely. 3 caused no damage. 2 impacted at the edge of a vehicle maintenance area and destroyed 1 light tactical vehicle and damaged 2 others. The 6 Fateh-110 ballistic missiles from the Lebanese element presented the most serious threat. The Fateh-110, unlike unguided rockets, carries a guidance system that provides meaningful accuracy against area targets, a circular error probable measured in tens of meters rather than hundreds. The 6 missiles were aimed at the intelligence collection site in northern Jordan, a hardened facility whose location the Hezbollah logistics team had acquired through a combination of commercial satellite imagery and reporting from contacts within the Lebanese government's signals intelligence community. The facility was real. Its location was accurately targeted. The 6 missiles were in the air at 11:01 p.m. on trajectories that would have delivered 4 of them within the facility's perimeter had they been permitted to complete their flight. The Iron Dome battery that had been positioned at Mafraq Air Base in northern Jordan 9 days earlier moved there specifically because the Nightwatch intelligence assessment had identified the Jordan facility as the highest value target in the proxy network's accessible target list, acquired the 6 Fateh-110 missiles at 11:02 p.m. and 14 seconds, 36 seconds after launch. 6 intercept solutions were computed. 6 Tamir interceptors were fired between 11:02 p.m. and 11:02 p.m. and 40 seconds. 5 intercepts were confirmed between 11:03 p.m. and 11:03 p.m. and 28 seconds. 1 Fateh-110 survived the first engagement and was acquired by the Hawk missile battery that served as the facility's secondary air defense layer. The Hawk fired one MIM-23 missile at 11:03 p.m. and 31 seconds. Intercept was confirmed at 11:03 p.m. and 44 seconds. All 6 Fateh-110 missiles had been destroyed. The strike package that had launched at 10:44 p.m. was distributed across the 3 countries in proportion to the target density in each. 26 F-35A Lightning IIs and 18F/A-18F Super Hornets addressed the Iraq and Syria nodes. 12 AH-64E Apache Guardian attack helicopters from the 82nd Combat Aviation Brigade, forward deployed to a classified operating location in western Iraq, addressed the militia command posts and weapons caches within their operational radius. The targets that were close enough to their position to allow helicopter engagement rather than fixed wing, and that were in terrain where the Apache's combination of precision and loiter time made it the superior option. 6 B-1B Lancer bombers from a forward operating location handled the highest density target concentrations. The logistics complexes in Deir ez-Zor Governorate and the Anbar supply network that had been the backbone of the militia resupply chain for 18 months. The EA-18G Growlers had been the first element of the package to begin their mission, activating their jamming suites against the militia communications networks at 10:46 p.m., 2 minutes after launch, 5 minutes before the militia attacks reached their targets. The jamming targeted the specific VHF and UHF frequencies on which the militia command posts coordinated fire missions and reported targeting corrections after initial salvos. The militia crews at their launcher positions had already been in position when the jamming activated. Their initial salvos were already programmed and did not require real-time communication to execute. But the jamming severed the feedback loop that the militia doctrine called for after the first salvo. The spotters who would observe impact and radio corrections back to the launcher crews for second and third salvos could not transmit those corrections through the interference. The Jerf al-Sakr crews, having fired their 8 rockets, sat at their launch positions waiting for the correction calls that never came. They waited for 4 minutes. Then they began the displacement sequence that their doctrine required. They were still on the road when the aircraft arrived. The Apache Guardians from the 82nd Combat Aviation Brigade reached the Jerf al-Sakr area at 11:09 p.m., 18 minutes after the Nightwatch launch authorization. The 4 pickup trucks with their rocket launchers had traveled 1.4 miles along a farm track in the dark, their drivers running without lights in the belief that darkness was protection. The Apache's TADS/PNVS targeting system does not require visible light. The trucks were acquired at 11:09 p.m. and 4 seconds by the lead aircraft's infrared sensor at a range of 3 miles. The rocket launchers on the truck beds were identified by their characteristic shape, the distinctive silhouette of a multiple tube launcher visible in the thermal image, even to an analyst who has seen the type only in recognition training. Unmistakable to a crew that has tracked this target set for 79 days. The crews in the trucks below did not know they had been found. There was no warning available to them. The jamming that the Growlers had laid across the militia communication frequencies had severed the network that might have passed such a warning. They were moving in the dark, in vehicles that glowed in the infrared as brightly as lanterns against the cold desert ground. The AGM-114R Hellfire missiles that addressed the 4 trucks were fired between 11:09 p.m. and 11:10 p.m. and 31 seconds. The Hellfire R variant carries a multi-purpose warhead capable of defeating both armored and soft targets. Its shaped charge penetrator, combined with a blast fragmentation sleeve that distributes lethal fragmentation across a wide area. Against a pickup truck carrying a rocket launcher and a crew of 3, The effect was total. All 4 trucks were confirmed as total losses of asset. The convoy had traveled 1.4 miles in 4 minutes. The Apaches had found them in 4 minutes at 1.4 miles and ended them in 91 seconds. The BM-21 Grad at Deir ez-Zor was addressed by a GBU-39 small-diameter bomb from an F-35A at 11:07 p.m. The launcher had not moved. The crew, following a different tactical doctrine from the Iraqi Element, had attempted to stay in their firing position and reload for a second salvo rather than displace after the first. The decision cost them the launcher, the vehicle, and the protective value of the building whose wall they had been hiding behind. The F-35A that released the GBU-39 had been tracking the target since 10:55 p.m., when the strike package's ISR feed from an orbiting MQ-9 Reaper had confirmed the launcher's continued presence at the firing position. The GBU-39 impacted at 11:07 p.m. in 6 seconds. The launcher was assessed as a total loss of asset. The building's remaining wall collapsed. The second Grad salvo it would have fired did not happen. The B-1B package addressed the logistics and command nodes beginning at 11:12 p.m. The target set in Syria's Deir ez-Zor governorate included 3 warehouses that Nightwatch had assessed as weapons and propellant storage facilities for the Syrian branch of the militia network, a vehicle maintenance compound where the BM-21 and other crew-served weapons were serviced between deployments, and the farmhouse complex that served as the Syrian network's primary command and coordination facility. The JASSMER cruise missiles assigned to these targets had been loaded on the B-1Bs before the launch, configured with the approach profiles that the mission planners had developed for each specific aim point. The warehouses received JASSMERs with penetrating warheads designed to detonate inside the structures rather than on impact with the roof, maximizing the fragmentation and blast effect against the stored materials inside. The vehicle maintenance compound received standard blast fragmentation warheads timed for surface detonation over the open vehicle park. The farmhouse command facility received a single JASSMER with a thermobaric effect warhead designed for maximum pressure effect inside a reinforced structure. The strike sequence ran from 11:12 p.m. to 11:19 p.m. All 6 aim points were assessed as struck. The warehouse fires were visible on Space Force infrared at 11:21 p.m. In Iraq's Anbar province, the militia supply network that had been moving weapons, money, and personnel between the Iran-Syria border crossing at Abu Kamal and the Iraqi militia depots west of Ramadi was addressed by a coordinated package of F/A-18F strikes and Apache engagements between 11:08 p.m. and 11:24 p.m. The supply network had been the single most important enabling infrastructure for the Iraqi Proxy Element, the system that brought the rockets and launchers and money that made the fire missions possible. The Nightwatch target package had invested heavily in characterizing it, and by 10:51 p.m., the operations cell had 41 aim points assigned to the Anbar supply network alone: safe houses, vehicle parks, a fuel depot, 2 weapons caches that Human reporting placed as containing significant stocks of 107mm rockets and mortar rounds, a money transfer office, and the relay communications site that connected the network's eastern and western logistics nodes. Of the 41 aim points, 37 were struck in the 16-minute window between 11:08 p.m. and 11:24 p.m. 4 aim points, vehicle positions that Nightwatch assessed as probable but not confirmed, were not engaged because the confirmation threshold for target discrimination had not been met by the time the strike package reached their sectors.
The Lebanese target set was the most sensitive and the most deliberately constrained of the 3. The Fateh-110 launch site in the Bekaa Valley had been known, precisely located, precisely characterized, for 11 days before the launch. The decision not to strike it preemptively had been deliberate, driven by the political sensitivity of strikes in Lebanese territory against Hezbollah infrastructure in a country whose government was formally attempting to disarm Hezbollah and where preemptive American strikes would have complicated the Lebanese government's domestic political position. The decision had been to allow the launch and address the launch site reactively, accepting the risk that the Iron Dome and Hawk defense would have to earn their keep in exchange for the political benefit of responding to a demonstrated hostile act rather than conducting a preemptive strike that would require more complex justification. The Iron Dome and Hawk had earned their keep at 11:03 p.m. At 11:14 p.m., two FA-18Fs from the USS Harry S. Truman addressed the Bekaa Valley launch site with 4 GBU-39 JDAM bombs. The launch site infrastructure, the revetted storage positions, the pre-positioned fuel and equipment, the communications repeater that connected the site to the Hezbollah command post in the Baalbek area, was assessed as destroyed. The commander of the Nightwatch operations cell noted in his log at 11:31 p.m. that the Iron Dome battery had performed its function and that the preemptive restraint had produced the intended political outcome. The Lebanese government had formally requested that American aircraft address the Bekaa launch site, providing diplomatic cover for the strike rather than requiring the United States to defend a preemptive action in Lebanese territory. At 11:47 p.m., the Nightwatch operations cell compiled the preliminary battle damage assessment. The numbers were not the headline. The numbers, 109 of 147 aim points struck, 37 confirmed as destroyed, 42 assessed as significantly damaged, and 26 requiring post-strike imagery confirmation before final assessment, were the product of 79 days of work. The headline was what those numbers represented: the systematic, coordinated disarticulation of a 3-country proxy network that had been the IRGC's primary instrument of distributed deterrence pressure against American forces in the region for the preceding 2 years. Not a temporary degradation, not a setback from which the network would recover in 90 days. A comprehensive disruption of the command architecture, the logistics infrastructure, the weapons stockpiles, and the communications nodes that made the network function as a coherent system rather than a collection of unconnected militias with no common operational picture. The militia elements in all 3 countries retained personnel. They retained some dispersed weapons and some organizational structure. What they did not retain was the integrated capability to conduct coordinated, multi-country operations that compressed American defensive systems simultaneously across 3 separate theaters. That capability had been built over years. It had been mapped over 79 days. It had been addressed in 16 minutes of coordinated strike action. The rebuilding would take longer than the mapping had taken. In the Victory Base complex near Baghdad, the motor pool was being assessed by the maintenance crew that had emerged from hardened shelter at 11:08 p.m. 3 vehicles damaged, 2 of them repairable. The crew chief, who had been the senior NCO in the shelter during the attack, walked the impact area with a flashlight and wrote his damage report with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this before and will likely do it again. He noted the impact points, the vehicle status, the perimeter damage. He did not note, because the damage report format did not call for it, that the crews who had fired those 8 rockets would not be firing again. In the asymmetric arithmetic of proxy warfare, patience is the price of precision. 79 days of mapping purchased 16 minutes of ending.